ISIL fighters that are over in Iraq and Syria at the moment, you know, are British-born and holding British passports. There are some very real problems. We don't need more laws, but we do need to enforce equally across everybody in this country the laws that we have.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC. This is Phone Farage. UKIP leader Nigel Farage takes your calls with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. This is Phone Farage with Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Only on LBC.
9 o'clock on Friday, the 26th of September. That means it's time for Phone Farage with me, Nigel Farage, here on LBC. And we're off to the races because we're coming live from the UKIP party conference in Doncaster. I'm taking your questions for the next half hour or so if you want to get involved, then here is how you do it. Call me on 0345 60 60 973 or email nigel@lbc.co.uk. And don't forget, you can also watch Phone Farage on our website, lbc.co.uk. So, straight to the first call, and it's Luke in Manchester. Good morning.
Morning, Nigel. You've recently made comments that we should sacrifice liberty for security in order to tackle ISIS. How do you think this stance will affect us at home?
Well, I'm afraid, you know, I've always been one that has said I don't want the state to excessively intervene in our lives. But what's become clear to me over the course of the last few months is that we now have, whether we like it or not, a fifth column within our own country. It's a pretty shocking thing to say, I know, but it's true, as evidenced by the fact that up to 1,000 of our own citizens, you know, British passport holders, are actually out in Iraq and Syria fighting with ISIS. And so what I'm scared of, genuinely scared of, and don't forget they've told us they will do it, I'm scared of a repeat of the kinds of things we saw in July a few years ago in London on the Underground. And what I'm saying is that I think given the potential level of threat in this country, that our security services need to have the ability to track these things down. And if that means that we're a little less private with our telephones and with our emails, then I'm afraid I've reached the conclusion, Luke, that that's a price we have to pay. What do you think?
Well, I don't know. I think it's just one of these typical problem reaction solutions that we keep on seeing. I mean, the Americans alone in 2013 supplied these rebels in Syria and that area of the world with 600 tons of weapons, and that's a conservative estimate. And now, you know, we see people going over and the reaction to these videos that we see coming out. And then, obviously, we've offered the solution. And what is the solution? David Cameron says we have no alternative but to go in there and bomb these rebels. You know, we were perfectly fine supplying rebels who were videoed eating another man's heart. You know, perfectly fine supplying those men with weapons. And now we don't have a choice. And then also now we're seeing, I'm quite surprised at your statements, actually. You know, you usually have a libertarian standpoint to say that even though John C. English, the NSA deputy director, that says in the USA at least only one terrorist plot was actually stopped by the mass phone tapping that happened in that country, that we must sacrifice liberty.
Luke,
let's hear from Nigel Farage.
Luke, I've got a lot of sympathy with what you're saying. Number one, I agree with you. David Cameron, this time last year, wanted to arm the very people that have morphed into ISIS, and our foreign policy in this area has been flawed and wrong for years. Secondly, just playing catch-up with Obama in launching bombing raids in Iraq, yes, of course it'll kill some of these people, but it will also kill a large number of civilians, and I don't see a proper long-term plan, so I agree with that. Yes, you're right. Traditionally, I've taken a libertarian stance. Yes, I don't like the mass intrusion into our lives, but I am genuinely fearful that we may well be not very far away from something very, very unpleasant happening in this country. And if we do it, it won't just be the lives of those that are killed or wounded. It actually will be the whole fragmentation of our society that comes on from that. So all I'm saying, Luke, is I agree with much of what you say, but I think our security services need the tools to get on with the job.
Just a question from me, if we can. No, Luke, we must move on. Thank you. A question from me, if I could. If you were taking part in the vote later today on the British involvement in bombing of Iraq. How would you vote, Mr.
I vote
Farage?
against it. I vote against it, Nick, because I do not see a coherent plan. I think if the Prime Minister says, look, we've got a plan, we're going to work with Arab states, not just in Iraq, because that's pointless. You know, we've got these problems in Syria, we've got these problems, you may have seen a French citizen was beheaded just 2 days ago in Algeria, we've got these problems in northern Nigeria. If we're going to build a coalition across the region, they're going to provide the fighters and the boots on the ground, and we're going to provide expertise, training and help. If I saw a long-term strategy, I might support it, but just to play catch-up and to launch bombing missions without that support, I don't like it. I also think if the next logical argument from Mr. Hammond was, well, OK, we'll send the British Army in. Do you know something? I don't think the public have an appetite for that. And I'm more worried, Nick. I'm actually more worried about the home front right at the moment. I'm worried about the fact we clearly have a fifth column from within. I'm worried about the fact that when Michael Gove showed, I think, tremendous courage with those schools in Birmingham in trying to root out extremism, what happened? He finished up being sacked. So I think our first priority is to make sure we're safe here at home.
And just before we move on, one final point on this, Nigel Farage. This, despite the request from the Iraqi government, please come help us sort out ISIL, you would still say no?
Well, I understand why the Iraqis are saying that, but given the way the Iraqi army performed at Mosul, it doesn't give me much confidence, because the Iraqi government say, firstly, will you bomb, and secondly, will you send your army? And I don't believe there is an appetite for that. This solution to this problem, or the containment, shall we say, of this problem, has to come from those countries themselves. We can provide help and expertise, but no more than that. Moving on, Ron in Newham is our next caller. Good morning.
Good morning. We already spend considerably less than the average in the EU on healthcare, and you propose to cut our taxes even further. So you want to put more money in my pocket. That's presumably so I have to pay as an individual for my own healthcare. How can that be right?
Good morning, Ron. First things first, you're absolutely right to say that up until 1997, we did, as a country, spend a lower proportion of our gross domestic product on healthcare than our next-door neighbours in Europe, and, you know, perhaps the best comparisons are France and Germany. That is no longer the case. One of the promises that Tony Blair did keep was he massively increased, with Gordon Brown as well, spending on the National Health Service.
But we never reached the average of the EU in spite of Tony Blair's
We've actually, for many years, been spending more as a proportion of GDP than France.
You must listen to Ron.
You know,
listen to Nigel Farage. You'll come back in a moment, Mr. Farage.
I'm making the clear point that we now spend more than the French on health, but we're getting a poorer delivery on cancer, stroke, and heart attack delivery than they are in France. And can I just make this clear? One of the Labour Party's attacks on UKIP, and they're very scared of us up here in Doncaster and in particularly much of the north of England.
Why? Why are they scared? There's a 10,000 majority for Mr. Miliband here.
They're scared because what they've seen over the last 3 years is the UKIP vote really biting and holding in these northern towns and cities. We are now the opposition party to Labour in most of the north of England. And what they've tried to do is to put out this myth that UKIP wants to privatise the National Health Service. If UKIP have any influence over power, you'll have to pay to go and see your GP, and that we want to privatise it. Ron, I tell you who privatised the National Health Service, or began that process? Labour, by introducing PFI deals, which have given the most appalling value for money to hospitals. Labour, by outsourcing many of the contracts to private companies who've made a lot of money on the back of it. I give you my assurance, Ron, that UKIP wants to maintain the National Health Service and absolutely insists that it remains free at the point of delivery.
Quick response from you, Ron, briefly, if you would.
How will it do that on a smaller tax take?
Well, the point about... OK, fine. The point about the smaller tax take is this. Our absolute priority is to get people who are earning minimum wage not paying tax. Why? People must be incentivised to come off benefit and go to work, number one. And number two, for all of those on minimum wage, their living standards over the course of the last 10 years have significantly gone downwards because of the cost of the gas bill and everything else. And actually, I think this initiative that we're launching today to say no tax on £13,500 a year, I would not be surprised, Ron, if by the next general election that actually wasn't the policy of one or more of the other parties.
How will you achieve so much with a lower... Just coming back to his central point, Mr. Farage. You achieve more with a lower tax take.
Well, you know, if you make tax cuts, you have to try and pay for it somewhere. And I accept that fully. Number one, Ron, we will not be spending over £10 billion a year on our membership of the European Union. Number two, we look at our foreign aid budget, and £2 billion a year of it is spent on genuine humanitarian aid, spent on inoculation, spent on providing clean water. So we would cut it from 11 billion to 2 billion. That's a big saving. Though I have to say, Ron, we may need to keep a slightly bigger contingency because Ebola, I think, could become a very, very big problem. Right. That's a big save. Thirdly, we would not spend upwards of £50 billion on HS2. And fourthly, do you know, at the moment, billionaires from Russia and from Arab countries like Saudi Arabia come to London and get VAT on the products they buy refunded. And I would have thought if anywhere where you wanted to tax the rich, they should be paying VAT.
Well, that's about 70 billion, I think you found. We move on then, Mr. Farage.
Thank you. Good morning, Gina in Hertfordshire.
Good morning, Mr. Farage.
Morning.
I'm a former student at the Camden School for Girls, albeit some time ago now, but I'm fully aware of what the school truly represents when it comes to equality and how far women and education have come over the last 100 years. However, I truly believe that the Veil plays no part at this school, whose very foundations have been built on the integration and de-isolation of women through education. Its founder, Frances Mary Buss, was a suffragette and herself a pioneer.
Yeah. I've got to move you to a question. It's very important background, Gina, but what is your question to Nigel Farage?
My question is, what are your views on the school's decision to stop this pupil from wearing the veil?
And just to remind my listeners, this is Camden School for Girls, a 16-year-old girl banned from taking her A-levels at this school because she started to wear the full niqab. She has now, it is reported, left the school in tears and indeed left the school for education purposes as well. She will not return due to the school's stance. Mr. Farage.
Well, I think the school are entitled to make their own rules. I have to say that. I also wonder, from the perspective of a teacher, you know, if several of your class were wearing a full face veil, how on earth would you know who anybody was? I have no difficulty with this school making this judgment. And it's funny, I was chatting this morning to a Muslim man who's one of our MEPs, and he made the point that actually nowhere in the Quran or in his teaching of Islam does it say that women should wear the face veil. And this is something that has become a modern trend. I think schools should be allowed to make their own rules, and provided those rules mean it's equal for everybody, I'm perfectly happy with that.
Gina, quick response from you before we move on.
That's what I would expect. I think they've made the right decision and move forward.
All right,
lovely.
We will
Thank
move
you
forward.
very
Gina,
much.
Mr. Farage, where do we go next?
We go to Anna in Bromley. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Farage. I'd like to hear your approach to capturing the votes of ethnically diverse people, many of whom have been working and contributing in the United Kingdom since the 50s.
Yeah, I tell you what, I think the answer to this is don't treat them differently. Treat them exactly as you would treat anybody else in this country. Let's have us all equal before the law. Let's have us all with a British identity. Let's have equality of opportunity for all. And that, I think, is the right approach. I don't think we've got it right with state-sponsored multiculturalism over the last 4 decades, where we've tried actually to divide everybody up. I think the more we are together, the better. And there's some evidence, Anna, some quite striking evidence that approach from UKIP is working, because when those European elections took place on May the 22nd earlier this year, the last opinion poll on the Sunday before those elections showed that more people from the black and ethnic minority community were intending to vote UKIP than were going to vote for the Conservatives and Lib Dems added up together. So I think UKIP is now beginning to do well in these communities. We're beginning to get black and ethnic minorities elected for us at local council level and indeed, as I said to the previous caller, at MEP level too. But we will do this, and our approach to this would be to treat everybody the same in one united country. Okay.
Let me do some emails that are coming in, Mr. Farage. Ian Hodge. Nigel, I'm in a Conservative seat in Reading with a small majority, as it's generally a Labour seat. I want to vote for you, but I cannot stand the thought of giving the seat back to Labour. As there's little chance of UKIP winning the seat, if you were me, what would you do?
Well, Ian, you know, I would say to you that in a democracy that people fought and died for, you should vote for what you believe in. It's rather like football teams. You know, if you want to support Man City or Liverpool, that's fine. But, you know, we go on supporting Crystal Palace because kind of that's our team. And I would adopt that approach to voting. Vote for what you believe in. Ian, I would also say this to you. You will get the London-based media who live and work and breathe and drink alongside the political class, who all have a sort of uniform view that virtually every single UKIP voter is a retired half-colonel living on the edge of Salisbury Plain. And yeah, a few of those do vote for us, it's true. But actually, the reason I'm in Doncaster today and the reason we're fighting hard in this by-election across the Pennines in Haywood and Middleton, which reportedly the Labour Party are deeply concerned about the advances we're making there. The point really, Ian, is this. We draw our support from across the spectrum, and I can't tell you whether Reading's a winnable seat or not. What I do know is UKIP will win seats in the House of Commons next year, and that will change politics.
Now, we're in Doncaster, as you say. If the sun shines on the righteous, Nigel Farage, you must be truly angelic, because it is absolutely blazing hot. It's a glorious day. We're the wrong side of, like, a greenhouse glass, so it's getting pretty hot in here. But you might not have the full media focus you might have liked. Down in Parliament, of course, David Cameron has called this vote. Was that politically strategic, what he did? All
I can say to you is the day after Douglas Carswell joined UKIP, there was an announcement that we'd been put on a state of emergency in this country. May well be true. And a few weeks later, when Mr. Cameron decides he wants to get involved with these bombing missions, he decides that parliamentary debate and vote must be held on the same day as the UKIP conference. Everybody I met in London on Wednesday, amongst the journalists and a few MPs that were milling around, said, what on earth was wrong, if it was that important, with doing it yesterday, Thursday? The Labour Party conference had finished. Mr. Cameron was back from America. They could have done it yesterday. They've chosen to do it today. I'm not going to be conspiratorial about this.
Are they running scared, Mr. Farage?
I think they're terrified.
We move on. An email here. Alana in Cobham. I've seen the video for you for the Ryder Cup. I've never laughed so much in my life. Credit to you. Two things. One, do you actually play golf? Two, how much were you paid?
Right. Well, Alana, if it made you laugh, then it achieved the objective. I did it because I used to play golf, and I'll come back to that.
I thought that swing looked rusty, Mr. Farage.
Very. I love the Ryder Cup. It's a fantastic competition. You know, golf is normally an individual's game. And yet, when it's played as a team game, it really is an exciting thing to watch. And I've even been to the Ryder Cup myself and watched it. And thirdly, I thought, what a great opportunity for me to say to people, I love Europe. It's just the European Union that I don't actually like. So I did it. I played golf as a youngster quite a lot. And I played off 4 handicap for 7 years. I was briefly 3.
Whoa.
So I was a 4 handicap golfer. Unfortunately, I had a very major car crash in the late 1980s where I damaged my head. This won't surprise many people, of course, but I damaged my head.
I'm not commenting.
And I had some inner ear damage. And somehow that hand-eye coordination with that little golf club blade and a ball, and I was never quite as good again.
Shame.
Then, of course, since then I've had a plane crash and goodness knows what else. So I'm not physically actually in that great a shape. Plus, I'm doing this job which is 24/7. So I've actually played 2 rounds of golf in 20 years, which is why the swing looked as bad as it did. And how much was I paid? I knew somebody was going to ask me this. Nothing. All right?
How much was UKIP paid?
Nothing.
You did it purely for the promotional benefit?
I did it because I thought it'd be a good, fun thing to do. And you know what? I enjoyed doing it, and I hope it makes people laugh. I really do.
Get it on lbc.co.uk to check it out. Mr. Farage, where do we go next?
We go to Andrew in Basingstoke. Good morning.
Hi, Nigel.
Hi.
As a voter, if you get into government, would you really look at the way the Child Support Agency calculates payments for parents?
Well, the Child Support Agency was set up, of course, by John Major in the early mid-1990s amidst a great sort of publicity blaze, and this was going to be the solution to all the problems. I have no doubt at all that John Major introduced this believing that there were too many, men predominantly, who were running away from their responsibilities. So I don't knock John Major for doing this. From what I can, and I'm not an expert on this, but from what I can see of it, it's become overly bureaucratized. It acts in an incredibly high-handed, undemocratic manner, and actually puts the fear of God into the lives of many people. And so I've kind of moved to the view, Andrew, that whilst their tactics have sometimes been deplorable, actually the Fathers for Justice campaign does have some legitimacy in that you do get, and it's not always men, but predominantly men, you get men who are denied access to their children whilst at the same time are being chased through the courts by the CSA for claims that are sometimes wholly unreasonable because they appear to be based on what people used to earn rather than perhaps on what they're earning today. So I do think this needs a bit of a rethink.
Quick response from you, Andrew.
I just think it's bias with women because in my personal circumstances, I earn just under 30,000. Right. My ex-wife earns over or has over 100,000 coming into her household, and I pay over £200 but under 300 in child support agency, and I have 3 children and I'm remarried, and I think it's the way it's calculated is just totally wrong.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Andrew, for that. And that's something I must think about more. Thank you.
Just while you mentioned Hayward and Middleton, which is the constituency in the north where you're fighting Labour. Of course, Douglas Carswell is taking on that seat down in Clacton. You'll be interested to hear, Mr Farage, we had an exit poll at the Olive Tree Cafe in Clacton today. The first 10 people going in to order their bacon sandwiches or eggs and chips, whatever it might have been, scored 9 UKIP, 1 Labour, which seems pretty positive down there in the cafe. How confident are you that in a couple of weeks' time you'll have your first MP?
I was in Clacton 2 nights ago. We held a public meeting in Jaywick, the southern bit of the constituency.
This is just a reminder, this is a very troubled part. This is the most troubled ward in the whole of the country.
Jaywick has got some social problems, of that there's absolutely no doubt. But we held a public meeting there in a big sort of sports hall as part of a school. Do you know, 850 people turned up to a public meeting in a seaside constituency on a September evening. I have never seen anything like it. And they... Yes, some of them that turned up were UKIP supporters, but the majority that turned up because they were interested that something was going on and that they had a vote coming up that could make a difference to British politics. And in a sense, I think what the Scottish referendum has taught us is that if voting becomes important, if real issues start to be discussed, people engage with politics. I'm not going to make any stupid predictions, but I think Douglas Carswell has been a tremendous MP. I mean, you know, his attention to detail, the amount of constituency casework he's done over the last 10 years is phenomenal. I'm confident that he'll win, but I'm not going to take anything for granted.
And then it's reported that there are 2 more Conservatives standing by, ready to go to one of your famous lunches.
Well, I'm all for lunches.
Couple of names?
I'm all for lunches. Look, I have not made any predictions of any kind like this, and it's being run by some newspapers. Farage boasts. I am not boasting. I am not saying anything.
More defections, possibly?
I am not saying anything, but if Douglas Carswell were to win in Clacton and win big, I think it may well make 1 or 2 others think this isn't such a bad idea.
We move on with calls.
We do. We move on to Frank in Stratton Vale. Good morning.
Good morning. Now that UKIP has become a mainstream party in British politics and you're about to become the member for Clapton, well, I think that you should be invited to a TV debate when they have the TV debate. What do you think? And what can you do to enable that? And what can we do to enable that?
Something factual, Frank, is that I myself am not standing in Clacton. Yes. That's Douglas Carswell, who's been the Conservative MP, who will be here in Doncaster later on today. Secondly, TV debates. Well, of course, it's funny you should raise that because Mr. Ferrari, sitting to my left, was the man on this very show who managed to get Nick Clegg to challenge me to a debate. In fact, we had 2 debates in the end. The first one run and sponsored by LBC and a subsequent one from another broadcaster. And we did that back in late March and early April of this year. And it's very, again, make politics relevant, people care. The sheer number of people that followed that LBC debate, either directly live or later on their computers. I mean, it was unbelievable, the millions of people.
It was millions, literally.
Absolutely millions of people that reached. So Frank, the answer is, I've already done 1 debate, so Nick was happy to debate with me. I have a feeling, and I could be wrong, that Dave appears to be less comfortable with the concept of having this debate. I think it would be outrageous if we faced the general election next year, and if UKIP was still, in the opinion polls, double or triple the level of the Liberal Democrats, it would be outrageous for us to be excluded. And if you really want to help Frank, I think what you should do is pen a couple of very simple 1 or 2 sentence letters to the broadcasters saying that you think it'd be right and proper for UKIP to be in those debates. So that would be a tremendous help for me.
All right, well said.
Thank you.
I have to put you a story on the front page of The Guardian, Mr. Farage. I don't know if you've had sight of this. This is the father of the main prosecution witness in Britain's biggest child sex grooming scandal, of course, just along the road there, just a canter away in Rotherham, accusing you're exploiting the issue for political gain. You've brought UKIP into Doncaster to try and unseat Labour in a Manchester by-election, and you don't heed. This man says it's unfair. You're using the scandal to win votes.
Well, Doncaster was booked way before we knew there was going to be a by-election in Manchester, so that doesn't actually
What
cut
about
at
the
all.
Rotherham child sex abuse scandal? You have strong views on that, don't you?
The individual concerned who's made these complaints has quite a political background and history himself, and reasons I can see why he may not like UKIP, all right? But let's deal with the issue itself. Rotherham.
He is the father of one of the witnesses.
I know he is. I know he is. But
So he does have a view, an interest.
He certainly has an interest, but he also has a very deeply political background himself. Here is my view, Nick. My view is that Rotherham was part of the one-party state that much of the north of England has become under Labour. Massive majorities. And massive majorities lead to complacency. And complacency leads to mistakes and even corruption in many cases. I mean, here in Doncaster 10 years ago, there was something called Donegate, a big corruption scandal that happened in this very town that we're in this morning. But in Rotherham, a Labour-controlled council, a child protection service working directly for that Labour-controlled council, and let me show you how political this is. Just over 2 years ago, a couple in their mid-40s, professional foster carers, and I take my hat off to anybody that can do that. The heartbreak of taking children and then having to give them away again, a terribly difficult thing to do. And that couple, who were a successful, top-notch, A1 graded foster couple, had 3 children removed from them. Do you know why? Because they openly supported UKIP. And at the very same time that was happening, we had child abuse going on a scale that frankly is unimaginable, and the former MP for the town, Dennis McShane, admitting publicly that because as he described himself, I'm a Guardian reading lefty, so we all turned a blind eye to effectively what we knew was going on. And what's happened in Rotherham is that political correctness, fear of being thought to be racist, came above the interests of those young girls. And I think the case is not only utterly disgusting, but if this isn't political, then goodness me, what is? OK. John in Richmond is our next caller.
Good morning, Mr. Farage. Good morning, Nick.
Hello.
Thanks for taking my call. You just mentioned political correctness and racist. What I've got to say to you, a couple of years ago, you probably wouldn't have been broadcast because it would have been termed racist. I want to mention the issue of immigrants and benefits claims. It's often trotted out that the number of immigrants claiming benefits is very small, and it is. Estimates from the National Audit Office reports are that only between 3 and 3.5% and 6.2% variable of all immigrants are claiming benefits. Now, that's an issue which I don't want to talk about. I want to talk about the other benefits, the opportunity benefits that immigrants get, which are never mentioned or rarely if ever mentioned. I'm talking about education, housing, the NHS, and of course work.
OK, he's nodding vigorously. Hold your fire. You'll come back, Mr. Farage.
John, actually, it's a bit worse than you suggest. I mean, you're quite right that immigrants do get healthcare, education for their kids, and all of these things. But what everybody forgets when they talk about benefits is they forget about in-work benefits. People on minimum wage, for example, get in-work benefits, such as tax credits, such as child tax credits, such, of course, as most other people do, as child allowance. So you can come here from Warsaw, get a job, your children may never have been to Britain, and yet you can qualify for child allowance.
So what would you do, Mr. Farage?
Well, the absolute truth of it is this, that the percentage of immigrants that are on benefits of some kind is massive, because many of the immigrants that come to Britain now are those that come here from very poor countries to seek low-paid jobs. And nobody, I don't for a moment blame any of them for wanting to do that. I understand why they want to do that. I just see a disbenefit in terms of wage compression in this country. I would say this, John, dead simple. If we need foreign workers to come to Britain, that's terrific. We give them a work permit, and if they can show us they've got a place to live in, and they've got insurance, health insurance, for the time they're here. That is fine. But quite honestly, I do not think people should claim benefits in this country or be entitled to them until they've been here for 5 years, paid into the system and obeyed the law.
We've got about a minute and a half.
We have.
Just briefly, can I put on this radio station, on LBC yesterday, Nick Clegg, as regards the hunt for the missing Latvian bodybuilder and wife murderer, suggested that we needed a sort of enhanced Interpol in a way to ensure that people from Latvia and elsewhere could not get into Britain. My caller suggested a more robust system. How would you guard our borders against Latvian murderers?
Classic of Nick, isn't it? You know, trying to deflect the issue. The issue is we are members of the European Union because Mr. Clegg and our political class want us to be so. And under the rules of that union, we do not have the ability to stop foreign convicted murderers from coming into our country, period. We don't need a beefed up, and it's not Interpol Nick wants, it's Europol. What he actually wants is the European Union police force to have this power. I want us to have our own laws in our own country. I want foreign workers, I want immigrants to come to Britain, but I want good people. I want to control the quantity and the quality of those that come to Britain, and that Latvian, if we had anything to do with it, would never have been allowed to come to this country. We've got a few seconds left, and we've got time, I think, for Nick in Feltham.
Morning. Good morning, Nigel.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call as well. I've always voted Labour, Nigel, but at the last general election, I decided to vote for the Liberal Democrats because I like some of the ideas. Immediately, they got into coalition, which is something I didn't vote for, and I felt I was sold down the river. If I vote for UKIP at the next general election, what's going to stop you selling me down the river and going to immediate coalition with anybody else?
Nick, can I tell you, I gave up a career in business, quite a good career in business, to come into politics out of passion and conviction. There are lots of things I want for a better country, but the first thing I want, Nick, is I want my country back. My country has been given away by our politicians. We have the majority of our laws now made in Brussels. We have no border controls, as we saw from the previous question over the Latvian murderer. I want the British people to govern their own country in a democracy, and I will never, ever, ever sell out on that principle. I promise you, hand on heart.
You'll be addressing more than 2,000 party faithful later today, which is an extraordinary increase in a very short time. Will you make that address without notes, or will you have some form of prompt or speech in front of you?
That's a very good question. I've been so busy this week, I haven't yet had time to even sit down and write the speech. That's going to happen at lunchtime. I'll work it out later.
What did you make of Ed Miliband's speech, if you had sight of it earlier this week?
I saw little clips of it. I didn't follow.
He forgot the economy, he forgot the deficit, he forgot immigration. It was interesting, he forgot the bit about immigration.
Yeah, well, of course, Labour would rather not discuss immigration. I don't know. Ed Miliband's a perfectly nice fellow to talk to, but there isn't a great deal of passion or fire or belief or connection. You know, the leader of the party that is supposed to represent the working classes, I don't think he connects with them. I don't think he even speaks their language.
And as with all our great party leaders, UKIP, the fourth force in British politics, will your wife race onto the stage and embrace you at the end?
I would not have thought so for a moment.
That probably has earned you even more votes. We've gone over time. Thank you very much indeed. UKIP leader Nigel Farage with Phone Farage. Back, I think, in a couple of weeks' time. We can look forward to your return in a fortnight. Nigel Farage shall return. And the news is next here on LBC.
UKIP leader Nigel Farage has told LBC he would vote against a British involvement in airstrikes against Islamic State militants in Iraq.
I do not see a coherent plan. I'm actually more worried about the home front. I'm